a Thursday afternoon in late July, I wandered into a local bookshop to spend some birthday money that had been burning a hole in my pocket. I went straight for the play section as I usually do, and although it was sparse, it was there. Sitting on the shelf was the usual suspects: a hard copy cover of the complete works of William Shakespeare, a Chekhov anthology, and the typical pair of Millers, Crucible and Death of a Salesman. But next to them sat a little yellow number. Success! Some new blood, a new piece for me to consume, and to sit on my little bookshelf alongside my complete works of Shakespeare, my Chekhov anthology, and my Millers. I picked it up and began to read the title. 4 Little Girls and Desire Caught by the Tail by Pablo Picasso. Picasso. Like the artist? Picasso wrote plays? How come I've never heard of them? If you Google something along the lines of Picasso's plays, you really won't find much. Not a lot of information is known about them. They are a neglected part in his history in comparison to the ginormous footprint his material artworks left. They also don't have a very large performance history or documentation of such, or a lot of scholarly articles, or hell, even posts from news sites or blogs. Picasso did quite famously design for theatre in ballet and opera, so why is so little known about his written works? At first, I honestly could not say why this was so. They are not widely panned or rejected by theatre critics. In fact, they are often labelled as the precursor to absurdist drama and playwrights like Samuel Beckett and Eugene Ionesco, who employed a very Picasso-esque style in their work. Not much is known about these plays. They are just as weighted in meaning as his physical artworks, containing metaphors about war, human nature, and childhood. But even deeper than that lies a darker secret. It is a disappointing truth that many artists were fundamentally bad people. Picasso was an abusive person. He abused his son and many wives. His granddaughter Marina Picasso commented on his dynamic with the women in his life, stating, "He submitted them to his animal sexuality, tamed them, bewitched them, ingested them, and crushed them onto his canvas. After he had spent many nights extracting their essence, once they were bled dry, he would dispose of them." My name is Ellie Waddingham. I'm sitting on Yugambeh country today, and I'm so proud to be able to continue the oral storytelling tradition of this land. If you enjoy this video, enjoy theatre or literature, don't forget to subscribe, and let's keep going. Oh, the drink of choice today is an oat chai latte as well. Today, I'm going to unpack Desire Caught by the Tail and The 4 Little Girls, the 2 plays that Picasso is credited with writing, and why I believe them to be a lesson in branching out as an artist and being unafraid to experiment, but also why we cannot afford to separate the art from the artist, and why we must examine these pieces with knowing and emphasis on Picasso's treatment of women. I'll start with The 4 Little Girls. Written in the 40s, this 6-act play follows 4 little girls, named first little girl, second little girl, and so on. It follows their adventure and playtime in a vegetable garden on the French Riviera, and is done in a truly childish stream of consciousness way, which might begin by describing the garden, its colours and sights, and end with a description of depression, death, or loss. The dialogue is almost reminiscent of those stories on Twitter where people claim that their kids can see dead relatives. It plays into the idea that there's this underlying darkness and dark curiosity in childhood that only children can see and understand, and that we lose understanding of when we become adults. Here's a small extract from The 4 Little Girls so that you might understand the kind of stream of consciousness childish writing of the play. "You mustn't believe that the cat has gone off behind the carrots to eat his eagle without fear or remorse. The blue of its cry for pity, the mauve of its leaps, the violent violets of its claws tearing Veronese green rays from the sulphur yellow of its rage, detached from the blood spurting from the fountain full of vermilion, the ochre of the lilac wall and the sharp cobalt fringes of its cries, the poor bird crouching on the clogs of its feathers, acrobatic monkey, the flags smacking their tongues on the steel and the knife already embedded. The cat gathers together and lets go its shadows and its sword on each floor, confused and confounded in the fall of verticals, squashing themselves, drop by drop, on the olive green curtain. I wish she would come back. We miss the sun. It's raining. The laughter of the flowers is tearing the dress with the white and verdigris checks and bursting the heart of the cloth crucified on my sandals with acrobatics and crabby temper. Call her, Jeanette. Give a great shout so that she takes her place in the sun again, and pull the plumb line through the wrong end of the opera glasses. As you can sort of tell, it really follows the rambling conversations that children often have, and I think really well captures how young children think and talk. Now to Desire Caught by the Tail. This play was conceived during the German occupation of Paris in World War II and delivers a metaphor of the hardship of being a civilian during war, with characters who serve to represent themes of hunger, cold, and love. This play is the more popular of the two, having a performance history usually attached to an exhibition of Picasso's works in galleries or in museums. It features numerous characters with names like the Onion, the Tart, Fat Anxiety, and Bigfoot. These characters all represent wartime struggles, and they are often grotesque and humorous, but conceal a deeper longing and very human, yet animalistic inner conflict during wartime. The piece itself is vehemently anti-war and is very reminiscent of Guernica, Picasso's famous anti-war painting. Again, I'll give a wee reading from the play so that you might grasp the style further. This one is a little bit different to the Four Little Girls. It has a more discernible plot line and more discernible dialogue. I wanted to say that if we want to come to an understanding at last concerning the price of furniture and the letting of the villa, we must, and absolutely with one accord, strip Silence immediately of his suit and put him naked in the soup, which, by the way, is beginning to cool off at a frantic pace. I asked for permission to speak. Me too, me too. Will you shut up? The choice of this hotel for private meetings in a walled-in public space such as this has not yet been made, and we ought to examine this very unsettled question under the microscope, bit by bit, and between the finest down of its hairs. Don't hide so cunningly behind the behind of the story which so deeply interests and grieves us. The choice of witnesses has been made, holy mackerel, and well made. And as for us, we'll be quite happy to cut our pattern from the shadow cast by the bills owing to the landlord. Now that you are somewhat familiar with these two texts, let's unpack them a little further. I'm going to attempt to answer two questions. Why aren't these texts more popular? And how Picasso's history with women bleeds through into his dramatic works. Coming from such a famous artist in a time when drama like this was popular, the only conclusion that I can draw as to why these works aren't more well known is that they are weird. Excuse the lack of a better word and let me explain what I mean by that. They don't make a lot of sense, frankly, even to someone who enjoys strange writing and absurdist drama. They are truly like someone put a stream of consciousness piece and a metaphor generator in a blender and served them up with an ice-cold glass of illusions. Desire Caught by the Tail is the more decipherable of the pair, and thus it is more popular. But even still, there isn't really a clear plot, large differences between characters, or even much connection between the dialogue. The characters don't really address each other, but rather deliver their lines in a way that serves the overall metaphor and message of the piece. I almost think these pieces should be looked at as poems rather than what we perceive to be a traditional Western play or piece of drama. They are also hypothesized to never have meant to be staged in a traditional theatrical way, and this is largely thought to be so because of their fantastical and absurdly large scale and bizarre stage directions, which realistically couldn't be staged even with the largest budget. Thus, the only conclusion that I can really draw is that they're confusing to the audience at large, difficult to follow if you don't have a synopsis handy or a general idea of what the metaphor is, and they challenge conventions of modern drama. Simply put, they are strange and confusing, and frankly, there are better plays that represent the themes of war and childhood in a more digestible or clear manner. But don't get too cozy, because within these texts and the world behind them, the pervasiveness of Picasso's abuse towards women and others in his life begin to seep in. As I mentioned before, and as you might already know, Picasso was not the pinnacle of an upstanding, morally good artist. He abused women for his artistic and personal gain, women who were artists themselves, and plagiarized their artistic styles, concepts, and energy. There can be no doubt that he probably used one of these women as inspiration for these plays. It was said that he was friends with more poets than painters, and many of the female artists who found themselves entangled with Picasso were writers and poets. The way that he was able to gain such an expansive view on girlhood and the violence and tribulation often associated with it was because of his muses, the muses that he would later bleed dry for artistic gain. The topic of separating the art from the artist is long and hotly contested, and there isn't really a simple yes or no answer. One can argue that we mustn't separate Picasso's personal life from his artistic work, but then we lose all of his contribution to artistic movements throughout his prolific career. As poet and novelist J. Perini said, "Nobody looks at a Picasso painting in a museum and says, 'I should not take this work seriously because Picasso cheated on his many wives and was abusive to his son.'" But at the same time, we cannot afford to completely dismiss Picasso's abuse when examining his work. A lot of the time, it's hard not to. If you take pieces such as his Minotaur paintings, which often depict violent beasts dominating female figures as a symbol of male virility, or his portraits of women, which often obscure their genitals and make them the focal point of the piece, or exploit the emotions of real women for art. If we take a feminist perspective to these artworks, separating the art from the artist, they could be viewed as great pieces of feminist art, but they are simply not. Because we cannot afford to make this separation, because it dismisses the true nature and meaning of the pieces. Instead of taking a strictly affirmative or negative stance on how we view the art of problematic artists, we must take from both sides. It is possible to acknowledge a great piece of art while also acknowledging the artist and the world behind that art. I fancy myself a painfully optimistic and philosophical person, and so I always like to find the little lessons and meanings in things, whether they be good or bad. And even though this story of an all too familiar abuse of power maddens me deeply, I found a little lesson from it, and I'd like to share it with you. So, I challenge you, dear viewer, go and create something using a medium that you've never touched before. If you consider yourself a visual artist, try writing. If you fancy yourself a dancer, try singing. I promise you it will be so liberating, and you might just discover an art form that you love, or one that you hate, but you'll never know if you don't try. But on a more important note, I'd like to remind you that we come from a long lineage of fierce, beautiful, powerful women who dominated the psyche of men, inspired them, drove them, and motivated them. Women were the tragic muse, but now we have the power to flip that on its head, to take back the power of being the muse of man, and to be our own muses, each other's muses. That concludes today's video on Picasso's plays. I found it really interesting reading about Picasso's works and who he was as a person, and sort of delving deeper into a playwright, which is not something that I usually do. But I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to see more video essays on literature, theatre and art, don't forget to subscribe down below. And before I go, I will leave you with a Shakespearean quote of the day. This one is from Twelfth Night, and I think it's a really beautiful quote to sort of remind us sometimes to let go of responsibility over things that we can't control, and to let time help us out. And it's this: "O time, thou must untangle this, not I. 'Tis too hard a knot for me to untie.